Let's talk about Binsey Poplars by Gerard Manley Hopkins, which is one of his more famous poems, relatively speaking, and I think quite characteristic of him in terms of his developed style. Let's read it and then we'll discuss it. Felled 1879. My aspens dear, whose airy cages quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun, all felled, are all felled, or a fresh and following folded rank, not spared, not one that dandled a sandaled shadow that swam or sank on meadow and river, and wind-wandering, weed-winding bank. Oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve or hew, hack and rack the growing green, since country is so tender to touch her being so slender, that like this sleek and seeing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all. Where we mean to mend her, we end her, where we hew or delve. Aftercomers cannot guess the beauty bean, 10 or 12, only 10 or 12 strokes of havoc unselve the sweet especial scene. Rural scene, a rural scene, sweet especial, rural scene. Stylistically, though there are definite similarities, we are in a very different place to Communion, which we recently looked at. Easter Communion is a sonnet. It's quite structurally and formally simple, with just beginning to experiment with phraseology, with word choice, with internal rhyme and assonance and alliteration and things like that. Whereas we come to Binsey Poplars and there is something more going on stylistically. This is quite irregular in formal terms. You know, we don't have an octet and a sextet. We don't have verses that are 5 lines long. We have a short verse and we have a long verse, and then we are rhyming. We have quelled, sun, felt is an A, rank C, one is a B, sandaled. Are we going to say that's an A? So not true. We'll put it as A plus. Sank, back to C, bank, C. And then we get to the second one, and again it's rhyming. Do, hue, green, E, tender, F, slender, F, ball, G, all, G, mean goes all the way back up to here, so it's an E, her, delve, so her is that F again, delve is H, bean goes to here, so it's an E, 12 is H, unselve, H, scene, those are all E's. You can see that there's a much more complex rhyme pattern. It's not wholly regular, and it's not regular between the verses, or within the verses. It doesn't go A, B, B, A, A, B, B, A. So, for instance, Easter Communion's octet has two set, a repetition of the rhyme: A, B, B, A, B, B, A. Here, it's all over the place in each of these, and you even, as I say, you have something that is dangerously close to false rhyme even. Line length is different, and it is not wholly. There's not like an obvious, easy logic every time to exactly why a line is as long as it is. My aspens dear, whose airy cages quelled. 10. I make pentameter quelled or quenched in leaves that leaping sun. 9 or 10. All felled are all felled. 6. So you've got here. Remember, let's be generous and say you're accenting that to be 10. I think that's obviously the intention. They're similar line lengths. Then you're going to 6 of a fresh 3 and following folded rank. You're back up to 10 suddenly. Not spared, not 1, 4. That dandled, 3. A sandaled, 6. So 6. Shadow, that swam or sank, 6. On meadow and river and wind wandering, weed winding bank, 14. So there's some regularity to some degree, but there's also irregularity. And it matches in the second. Nothing that final 14 syllable thing. Nothing compares to it. So formally, but it doesn't sound lazy. Here's the important thing. So he's just rubbish, isn't he? This guy doesn't know how to write. He's kind of got the idea of rhyme, but he's like a teenager writing for the first time. He doesn't have any idea of meter. But of course that's not true. We've listened to it. We hear how it works. My aspen's dear, whose airy cage is quelled or quenched in leaves the leaping sun. So far so regular. All felled are all felled. Okay, that's a sudden jolt of a fresh and following folded rank. A bit back to normal, more iambic. You could put, I'm not going to track stresses, but you can tell there's, some of that is fairly ordinary stress patterns. Not spared, not won. The dandled or sandaled shadow that swam or sank. So here, it's the fact that the shorter lines partly make it go quicker. So I think that's clearest with all felled are all felled. The reason that in Hopkins terms we pronounce these short, felled rather than felled, is one, because simply in English we do not pronounce the past tense of to fell in the context of a tree as felled. But also because he gives us, when he wants us to really stress a what could be a short vowel, he gives us a nice apostrophe there. So slender. Dandled or sandaled shadow that swam or sank. On meadow and river and wind-wandering, weed-winding bank. And so even though what's come before has rattled along a bit quicker in terms of when we get to the line starting emphasis and stress, that doesn't make this last line feel overlong. It's rather this kind of very sudden kind of emphasis and longing look at the riverside. And I suddenly think of Grantchester by Rupert Brooke. On meadow and river and wind-wandering, weed-winding bank. You see also that he is heavily relying on alliterations and some internal rhymes. So quelled, quenched, repetition as well, which counts as a form of alliteration functionally. In leaves the leaping sun, felled, which of course softly goes to fresh and following folded rank. Not spared, not one that dandled or sandaled, internal rhyme. Shadow that swam or sank. Now, not all of these, in terms of alliteration, sh and sw are obviously slightly different sounds. So it's a sort of half alliteration, but it's something where the same, it's helping the rhythm come along that we are repeating some of the same sounds. Sw and sh. There's enough of a difference to start. We start with a sh, particularly with the sw. We start with a sw. It's clearly enough an S. It's not like, oh well, they're technically the same letter, they sound completely different. Sh and sw give us enough aural similarity. Oh, if we knew if we but knew what we do. Here we actually have, arguably, you've got a bit of a half rhyme, but what, and you do. So, but what is an assonance, isn't it? Not a half rhyme, sorry. New do is a rhyme. When we delve or hew, delve, of course, is going to come back all the way there, and hew, so we have repetition. Hack and rack the growing green, rhyme, internal rhyme, alliteration, since country is so tender to touch, her being so slender, that like this sleek and seeing ball, but a prick will make no eye at all, even where we mean. And here, this again this is actually a very soft one, because I don't think w tends to be the strongest of word sounds, but even where we, so the repetition of where we, it's both repetition and therefore it's kind of an emphasis of the alliteration of where we. Even where we mean to mend her, we enter, internal rhyme. Where we hew and delve, we obviously have said that, so repetition back there. Aftercomers cannot guess the beauty bean, alliteration. 10 or 12 soft alliteration, only 10 or 12 soft alliteration which is being repeated. Strokes of havoc unsolve, sweet a special scene, rural scene, a rural scene. So these are repetitions of each other, but scene also goes there, but then suddenly we have scene again, and here it's the combination of the phrases sweet a special rural scene. So this long, really heart cry at the end of the scene, the beautiful place he remembers, the beauty being, and using that repetition to emphasize that emotional. It's a climax, but it is a minor in terms of a resolution of a theme. It is not a sort of fine cadential period for going into a rousing conclusion. It's actually a fading away conclusion. In musical terms, you still have some of this cadential material of the 10 or 12 strokes of havoc unsolved, which is using some of the rhymes there, is also talking about the key thing of what's happened. Finally, we are being told what's happened before we get the resolution. But the resolution is then a falling, fading, sad one, and one which is very much just a kind of a heart cry. There's a lot of technical things going on here to make this sound as good as it does. This sounds very good. Hopkins is looking for a diction which works, as I said in Eastern Communion, a post-romantic diction. It is, and by that I mean it's something where he's using many of the same words and techniques and tropes and so on, but he is regularly attempting to freshen them or twist them in some way to make them not dead metaphors, in Eliot's phrase for that. Now, I compare him to Eliot in terms of, well, purifying the dialect of the tribe, but obviously what he's doing is very different, is that both of them formally experiment, absolutely. But Hopkins, where Eliot is more like his metaphysical heroes than he is like Hopkins, and Hopkins is not very much like, and we compare. I noted in the Easter Communion video the comparison to Donne's "God My God," which we've in My Sickness, which we've done on the channel. That there, there's these Latin tags. There's mention of modern studies, modern exploration, etc. The age of exploration. Hopkins doesn't really ever do that. He uses sometimes quite distinctive in-group imagery, and I'm thinking about in Easter Communion as the example. You talking about potentially metaphorically, potentially literally, about self-flagellation and about being cold and having scarce sheathed bones from your fasting. You've really suffered during Lent preparing for the great feast of Easter Vigil Mass. Binsey Poplars has the sense of his own experience of being a child, not a child, a younger man, and having greatly enjoyed being in this place. So it's a private experience in a sense, but neither of them is using hyper-specialized language to get there. In the 19th century, using a bunch of biblical images does not count as specialized language for that. It's not elite language. So what you look at the Wasteland as an example, the most obvious one in the Wasteland has all this learnedness that Eliot has, that he's integrating with music hall songs and with other all kinds of other materials into this tapestry of effects to try to find a new way to speak and write poetry in English. Hopkins is doing it via not purely music, not like, oh, well, if it just sounds good, who cares what it means? Actually, he has very strong poetic ideas he wants to communicate, but he's using sound experimentation and to some degree formal experimentation here. This very kind of shocking poem. It's interesting. Here's the thing: is that if someone, a good modern poet who works a lot with rhyme, wrote this, and I read this on a website or whatever, I think about the many zines, magazines that function just on websites nowadays, have indeed for 15, 20 years. And this showed up, I'd obviously think it's very good. I wouldn't think it's brand new because I'd know people have done things like this before, but you'd be like, oh wow, this person has been very bold and being willing to risk, to have a structure and have a rhyme scheme and have stress patterns and have it scan whilst also being incredibly bold with line length and with rhyme pattern within the verses, and the fact the verses are so different, and the fact that they you sort of have a concluding point from what I've called the cadential material here. But even so, it's not really, is it? Because it's just all one verse, and it's continuing because the unselving with the 10 or 12 strokes both starts rhyming from the delve here, and also is continuing thought of what destruction does, how destruction happens. I think, wow, this person's really bold and really pulled off a bold experiment. It's not something like, oh, well, now that we know how to write a sonnet, you just do it like that. This is a verse formed for this poem, and doing clever things for this poem. Whatever sources he's drawing on, whatever kind of patterns he's drawing on, it is for this poem, and it's why The Window, Raw Pied Beauty, maybe his other, or Recht Deutschland, his three other most famous poems, and aren't the same. It is that here he where else does he need to have the merging of the two forms of the scene, the sweeter special scene, the rural scene, sweeter special rural scene, which is mourning. He doesn't need to do that in the other situations in the same way. And so here he does that like he does it, because with that heavy repetition at the end, with this mournful, slowly closing, quieting conclusion, because it fits the poem. And so, yes, it's something which makes, but neither Hopkins or Eliot is particularly replicable, whereas Spenser and Shakespeare, as far as their poetry go, manifestly were replicable because people have replicated them a lot, and they were replicating other people in various ways, like formally. Whereas, yes, that becomes harder and harder with the sort of breakdown of, I think the breakdown of the Romantic through to Georgian period, that long 140 years or whatever it is, the slow breakdown of our acceptance of form, and of perhaps of some of those older forms, their ability to communicate to us. But here we do have a very successful experiment using structure and relatively traditional elements in a very fresh way, and where the wonderful thing for Hopkins is he just pulls it off. One or two other brief observations. One, I think there is something which one must always bear in mind. It's one of the things that strikes me about it. Where we mean to mend her, we enter. This is to do with our country, the growing green. We cannot know what we do when we delve or hew. Oh no! Oh, if we but knew what we do when we delve or hew. The point is that we do not know the consequences of our actions, and it's interesting here that this is, in the small c sense, this instinctive conservatism. By that I don't mean in any political project sense. I mean this response of, it is good to preserve that which has been valued and good. And here, perhaps for very good, oh, well, look, some of the aspens, they had a disease that you don't know about, Gerard. Or, look, yes, I understand you're sad, and it was very nice when you were a child, but actually we're going to do some wonderful things now we're going to, be doing extra things around here, and having the trees there, they're undermining the road, and we want to resurface stuff, whatever the reason. But you just think, no, there was this wonderful double avenue of trees, and the avenue of trees, either side, and that they were beautiful, and they had many precious memories, and they're lost, and they can't be brought back. You can't stick them back together. You need 10 or 12 strokes to do this, and that destruction being irreversible is all the more poignant and pointed, and so we should be careful about preserving those precious things we have. And it doesn't provide a full program. It doesn't kind of give you a communist manifesto, let's say, to take a contemporary, but it does offer something which we all have experienced as true, and particularly as he connects to childhood, is very, very poignant, isn't it? Those things, or early manhood, those things of our youth that we most treasure, that disappear or break. Yes, Anyway, yeah, no, it's a lovely poem, and if you've got any thoughts, I'd love to hear them in the comments. Till next time.